Most women are ruined by the documents they never read. Eliza Marrow was saved by one she copied out herself, in her own careful hand, for 2 shillings and 6pence, without ever being told whose life it belonged to. She played his fiancée for a single evening, 1 dinner, 1 borrowed gown of gray-green silk, £6 in her palm at the end of it, more money than she had held at one time in her entire adult life. And then, at 2 in the morning, alone with a guttering candle and the contract spread across her knees, she read Clause 9 properly for the first time. There was a space in it where the ending should have been. It was blank. The offices of Bellamy and Sons occupied 3 cramped rooms above a chandler's shop in Cheapside, and in winter they were the coldest place in London that still called itself indoors. Eliza Marrow sat at the copying desk nearest the window, because the window was where the light was, and light mattered more to her than warmth. She was 26 years old. She wore fingerless mittens of unraveling brown wool, so that her hand could still hold a pen, and she had learned to breathe shallowly in the last hour of the day, because a deep breath made her shiver, and a shiver made the line waver, and a wavering line meant copying the whole page again on her own time. She was the finest copyist Mr. Bellamy had ever employed, and he paid her 6 shillings a week for the privilege of saying so. It was not a career. It was what was left after a career. Eliza had been a governess once, in a tall, handsome house in Hampshire, teaching French and globes to 2 little girls she had genuinely loved. She had been dismissed after 11 months without a character reference, and the reason she had been dismissed was that the master of the house had followed her up the back stairs one night, and the mistress of the house had found it easier to believe her husband than her governess. No character reference meant no governess post, ever again. It meant no shop counter, no lady's companion, no respectable door in England. What it left was this piecework copying in a room where the ink sometimes froze, for a man who never once asked how she came to be so overqualified for it. Eliza had made her peace with it. She had a room in Clerkenwell with a bed and a nail on the wall for her cloak. She owed nothing to anyone. On Sundays she walked to the river and back, and that was her entire life, and it was hers, which was more than she could say for the 11 months in Hampshire. That Thursday, Mr. Bellamy dropped a folded sheaf of papers onto her desk without stopping. Fair copy. 3 copies. Client wants them tomorrow before noon. Eliza smoothed the pages flat. It was not a will, which was most of her work, and it was not a marriage settlement, which was the rest of it. It was something she had never seen before in 4 years of copying other people's private business. It was an agreement for the temporary representation of an engagement. She read it as she copied it, because copying without reading is how errors are made. The parties were named only as the first party and the second party, which was itself unusual and expensive, and told her the client had paid extra to keep a name off a page. The first party required a woman to be publicly understood as his betrothed. The second party agreed to be so understood. There were clauses about discretion. There were clauses about conduct. All of them, she noticed, restrictions on him rather than on her. There was a clause specifying that no obligation of any physical nature whatsoever was created or implied, drafted with a stiffness that suggested a solicitor writing under a client's very direct instruction. And there was Clause 9, which concerned the term of the arrangement. Eliza copied Clause 9 3 times, and each time she came to the same place and stopped. The clause described in careful language how the represented engagement should be maintained and how it might be brought to an end. It said the second party might terminate it at any hour by a single written sentence, without cause, without notice, without penalty, and with her fee paid in full regardless. It said nothing at all about the first party terminating it. And where the document should have named a date, or a season, or an event, or any fixed horizon of any kind, it said only until such time as Until such time as what? The sentence simply stopped and the line ran on empty to the margin. Eliza sat back. Her breath made a small, pale cloud in the cold. 4 years of copying had taught her that the law is a language, and that a blank space in that language is never nothing. A blank space is a door somebody has deliberately left unlocked. It was not her business. A copyist copies. Mr. Bellamy had told her so on her first day, and on perhaps 40 days since. She took up a pencil, because pencil could be rubbed away, and in the margin beside Clause 9 she wrote, in her small, even hand, Clause 9 has no term. Was this intended? Then she finished the 3 copies, banked the fire down to nothing, and walked home in the dark. The client came at 11 the next morning, and Eliza knew he was in the outer room before she saw him, because Mr. Bellamy's voice climbed half an octave the way it did for money. She heard the papers being turned. She heard the turning stop. Then a voice, low and unhurried and entirely without deference, said, "Who wrote this?" There was a pause of the kind that has a great deal of Mr. Bellamy inside it. "Wrote what, Your Grace?" "There is a pencil note in the margin of my private agreement, in a hand that is not yours, since yours is unreadable. Who wrote it?" "My copyist, a woman I employ for the fair hand only. She has no business commenting, and I assure you she will be spoken to most severely." "Bring her in." Eliza stood, straightened her cuffs out of pure habit, and went in. The Duke of Blackmere was standing by the fire with the contract in one hand, and the first thing she noticed about him was that he did not look like the men whose wills she copied. He was perhaps 35, very tall, and built along heavier lines than fashion permitted, with the shoulders of a man who had done actual work with them. His coat was excellent and 4 years old. His boots were splashed with the pale gray clay of a river cutting. There was a healed scar across the knuckles of his right hand, of the kind you get from a snapped chain, not a duel, and the nail of his thumb was ridged black with old bruising. His hair was dark and badly cut. His eyes, when they came to her, were a flat, wintry gray and startlingly awake. "You wrote this note," he said. "I did, Your Grace." "Why?" "Because a term is customary," Eliza said. "Because when a clause is drafted with as much care as Clause 9 has been, and then leaves the one figure a reader looks for entirely absent, it is either an error of copying from the draft, in which case you would wish to know of it, or it is deliberate, in which case my noticing it does no harm." "Miss Marrow," Mr. Bellamy said in a strangled voice. "Your Grace, I must apologize." "Be quiet, Bellamy." The Duke did not raise his voice at all. He was looking at Eliza. "Which do you believe it is?" "Deliberate," Eliza said. "On what evidence?" "The clause immediately above it permits the second party to end the arrangement in one written sentence at any hour. That is a very generous provision to grant a woman you have not named. A man careless enough to forget a term is not careful enough to write that. So the blank is not carelessness." The room was quiet. The chandler's boy shouted something in the street below. "Sit down, Miss Marrow," the Duke said. Eliza did not move, because in 4 years nobody in that office had ever offered her a chair, and her legs did not entirely believe it. He noticed. He said nothing about it. He simply drew the second chair away from the wall, set it a little nearer the fire, and returned to the mantelpiece to give her the space to reach it without being watched. She sat. "The arrangement in your hand," he said, "was drafted for an actress, a Mrs. Coin of the Haymarket, who was to be presented at my aunt's table on Tuesday as my betrothed. On Monday, Mrs. Coin received a better offer from a gentleman named Crane, who is precisely the reason I require a betrothed at all, and she has taken it, and I do not blame her. I have no woman for Tuesday. I am not an actress, Your Grace. No, Mrs. Coin could weep on command and could not have told you the difference between a settlement and a lease. On Tuesday, I will be seated at a table of 19 people, every one of whom will spend 4 hours attempting to establish that I am lying. He looked at her. I do not require an actress. I require a woman who reads. Why do you require anything? Eliza asked. Forgive me. If I am to be the one seated at that table, I would rather know what I am seated in. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile. My brother was the Duke, he said. I was the second son, and I was raised to be nothing in particular. So at 19, I made myself useful instead. I build canals, locks, cuttings, aqueducts, actual mud, actual money. 4 years ago, my brother went out on a bad horse on a wet morning and did not come back, and I inherited a title I was never taught to want and a great deal of land I did not need. And now the world wishes you to marry. The world wishes me to marry Miss Georgiana Crane, who is 19 and afraid of me, and whose father, Lord Crane, holds a controlling option over the Ashby Cut, which is 40 miles of canal I have spent 3 years and a considerable fortune driving through the Midlands. Crane's price for releasing that option is the marriage. My aunt has been persuaded that this is a triumph of matchmaking. Tuesday's dinner is the ambush in which it is to be settled. He set the contract down on Bellamy's desk. I do not intend to buy a girl's whole life to finish a canal, but a man who simply refuses is negotiating. A man who is already engaged is not. Eliza looked at the fire for a moment. One evening, she said. One evening, £6, whatever the outcome. A gown, which is yours afterward, and which I will not see and did not choose. My carriage there and back. Nothing is asked of you that is not asked at a dinner table. He paused, and clause 9, Miss Marrow, which you may invoke at any hour of any day, including in the middle of the soup, and which requires you to give me no reason whatsoever. £6 was 20 weeks of copying. I shall want to read it properly first, Eliza said. All of it. I should be insulted if you did not. The gown arrived Tuesday afternoon in a box lined with tissue, and it was gray-green silk, high in the throat, entirely without ornament, and Eliza understood at once that whoever had chosen it had been told the woman would not wish to be looked at. It fitted almost exactly, only the waist wanted taking in, and Eliza took it in herself with 11 small stitches, sitting on the edge of her bed in Clerkenwell. She did not prepare by practicing a smile in the glass. She prepared the way she prepared a hard piece of copying. She wrote out the guest list he had sent her and learned it. 19 names, their connections, their marriages, their dead. She had copied the wills of 3 of those families in the last 4 years, and she knew things about them that they did not know she knew, and she resolved to use none of it and to be quietly comforted by all of it. At the door of the house in Grosvenor Square, the Duke of Blackmere handed her down himself, and as she took his arm, she felt the whole immense stillness of the man beside her and realized he was more frightened of the next 4 hours than she was. They will ask you where you come from, he said quietly. Then I shall tell them. Miss Marrow. Your Grace, a lie invented in a hallway will not survive 19 people and 4 courses. The truth is dull and unanswerable. Let me use it. He looked down at her. You are quite certain? I am a copyist from Cheapside. What precisely are they going to do? Dismiss me? The dining room was gold and candlelight, and it smelled of hothouse lilies and hot wax, and Lady Ambrose, the Duke's aunt, came at them across it like weather. She was 70, magnificent, in purple, and she had the eyes of a woman who had been correct about everything for 5 decades. Nathaniel, she said, you have brought a person. Aunt, may I present Miss Eliza Merrow, my betrothed? The word went out across that room like a dropped glass. Eliza felt every head turn. She curtsied precisely as deeply as was correct and not 1 inch further. Merrow, Lady Ambrose repeated. I do not know the name. Merrow of where? Of nowhere at all. Ma'am, Eliza said pleasantly. My father was a clergyman in Wiltshire with a living of 200 a year and 11 acres of glebe, and he died when I was 19 and left me his books. I have no fortune, no connections, and no expectations. I earn my living copying documents in a solicitor's office in Cheapside. The silence that followed had a texture to it. Down the table, a young man began to laugh and then discovered he was laughing alone and stopped. Lady Ambrose's chin came up very slowly. You say that as though it were a recommendation. I say it, ma'am, because you would have discovered every word of it by Friday, and I would rather you had it from me on Tuesday. I have found that people forgive poverty a great deal more readily than they forgive being made fools of. Nobody at that table had said an entirely true thing out loud in 30 years. Lady Ambrose looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, Sit by me at dinner, and turned away, and the Duke of Blackmere let out a breath so slow and so quiet that only Eliza, on his arm, could possibly have felt it. Lord Crane came at her over the second course, which was the correct moment, when a woman is most likely to be tired and least likely to be sharp. He was a handsome man of 50, running to softness, with a pink, well-shaved face and a voice pitched for a whole table to overhear. Miss Merrow, Blackmere tells us nothing, so I must ask you, do you take any interest in his mud and ditches, or does he spare you? He does not spare me, my lord. Then perhaps you can settle a small dispute. His Grace maintains that the Ashby Cut will carry coal at 4d. the ton mile. I maintain, and the survey supports me, that the Summit Reach will need 6 locks more than he has drawn, and that his 4d. Is a fairy tale that will bankrupt every man who has trusted him. Crane smiled around the table. It is why my option exists at all. You understand. Someone must be sober about these things. Eliza set down her fork. She had copied the Ashby survey, not for the Duke, for Crane's own solicitors, 8 months earlier, in November, 3 long days of triple copying in a cold room, and there is no way on earth to know a document better than to write it out 3 times by hand. Which survey, my lord? She asked. Crane blinked. The survey. There is one survey. There are 2. There is Mr. Reynolds' survey of the Summit Reach, dated the 9th of March, which gives the fall at 51 feet and requires, as you say, 6 additional locks. And there is Mr. Reynolds' corrected survey, dated the 22nd of June, which records that the March levels were taken from a benchmark on the Ashby Church Tower that had been rebuilt in 1809 and stands 4 feet 9 inches higher than the parish record supposes. The corrected fall is 39 feet. It requires 2 locks, not 6. The table had gone entirely silent. That is nonsense, Crane said. It is the 2nd and 3rd paragraphs of the corrected survey, my lord, and I copied both of them out 3 times in your solicitor's own office in Chancery Lane in November, at 2 shillings and 6d. the sheet, and I could recite the whole of the 3rd to you now if the company would forgive me. Eliza folded her hands in her lap. Your option on the Ashby Cut is priced upon a benchmark error of 4 feet 9 inches. I do not say you knew. I only say that you have had the correction in your possession since June, and that you have described the March figures to 19 people this evening as though the June ones did not exist. Lord Crane's face had gone the color of candle tallow. Somewhere down the table an elderly gentleman said distinctly, Good God. And Lady Ambrose, beside her, put down her wine and said in a voice of enormous satisfaction, Nathaniel, You will bring this young woman to dinner every Tuesday for the rest of my life? He brought her home at 1:30 in the morning and did not speak for most of the drive. And when the carriage stopped in Clerkenwell, he got down into the wet street himself to hand her out. Miss Marrow, what you did tonight was a piece of copying, your grace, nothing more. It was not. He put the £6 into her hand, and then, because he seemed to feel it required saying, the engagement will be reported in the papers by Thursday. It will be some weeks before it can be quietly allowed to lapse. You are not required to do anything further. Clause 9 is yours. Good night, your grace. Good night, Miss Marrow. She went up the 3 flights, lit her candle, sat down on the bed in the gray-green silk she had taken in with 11 stitches, and took out her copy of the contract because she was too full of the evening to sleep. She read Clause 9. She read it 3 times, and then she found the thing she had missed in the cold at Bellamy's desk, because at Bellamy's desk she had been reading the fair copy of a draft, and this was the executed original, and on the executed original somebody had made a change. The words for the evening of Tuesday the 14th had been struck through with a single ruled line. Above them, in a hard black hand that was not a solicitor's, was written one word, indefinitely, and it was initialed, and beneath it a payment schedule had been added in the same hand, £50 a quarter, payable to the second party at Coots, commencing at Michaelmas, continuing without term. Eliza sat in the dark for a very long time with her heart going like a bird against a window. One evening, he had said it in Bellamy's office with the fire behind him, and he had let her sit down first. And all the while the paper in his coat had said something else entirely. She was at the door of the house in Berkeley Square at 9 the next morning, with the contract in her hand and Rain on her shoulders, and she went past the butler because he was too astonished to stop her. The Duke of Blackmere was in his shirt sleeves at a table covered with drawings, and he stood up so fast that his chair went over. Miss Marrow, you altered Clause 9. She put the contract down on the drawings, you struck out the date, and you wrote indefinitely in your own hand, and you initialed it, and you added £50 a quarter for the rest of my natural life, and then you stood in that office and told me one evening, £6, a gown, one evening. He did not deny it. He did not flinch. He looked at the paper, and then he looked at her, and he said, read it again, all of it. I have read it. Read what it binds, he said, not what it says. You are the best reader of documents I have ever met in my life. Read it. Eliza opened her mouth to tell him what she thought of that, and then, because she was who she was, she looked down at the page instead. And she saw it. She saw it the way she had seen the blank space in the cold at Bellamy's desk, the whole shape of the thing turned over in front of her like a coin. The clause above gave her the right to end the arrangement in one written sentence, at any hour, without cause, with her fee paid in full. Clause 9, with no term in it, gave him nothing at all. You cannot end it, she said. No. Ever, there is no provision. You have written yourself an obligation with no door in it. She looked up. £50 a quarter, commencing at Michaelmas, continuing without term. If I had walked out of that dining room last night in the middle of the soup, you would still owe me £50 a quarter until one of us died. Yes. Why? The Duke of Blackmere put both hands flat on the table among his drawings. Because I have watched what happens to a woman who is useful to a great house for as long as she is useful, he said. My mother's companion, 31 years. When my mother died, she was given a black gown and a coach fare to her sister in Norwich, and the sister was dead, and I did not learn any of it until 11 years afterward. She had done nothing wrong. She had simply come to the end of somebody else's arrangement. He straightened. I would not offer another woman a thing that ends when I have finished with it, so I took the ending out, not to hold you, to make certain I could not put you down. Eliza discovered that she could not entirely see the drawings on the table. You should have told me. Yes. He said it without hesitation. I told myself you would refuse a settlement and accept a wage, and that was probably true, and it does not excuse it. I intended to tell you after Tuesday, when it would no longer look as though I were buying anything. I have been standing here since 8 o'clock composing the letter. It is very bad. There are 4 attempts in the fire. Eliza looked at the fire. There were, in fact, 4. £50 a quarter, she said, is a very great deal of money for one evening's copying. It is not for the evening. It is so that you are never again 6 shillings a week away from a man who follows a governess up the back stairs. He stopped. He had gone quite still. I did not mean to say that. Bellamy told me nothing. I asked in Hampshire myself, in March, before I ever came to Cheapside with a contract in my pocket, because I do not put my name in a woman's hands without knowing whose hands they are. I have known since March that you were dismissed for another man's conduct. His voice had dropped very low. It is the reason I asked for the copyist and not the actress, Miss Marrow. I wanted someone who had already survived being called a liar by better-dressed people. The rain came against the window. Down in the square a coal cart went by. Your canal, Eliza said at last, unsteadily, wants 2 locks, not 6. Crane's option is worthless by Friday. You do not need a betrothed anymore. No. Then clause 9 has nothing to do. It is an obligation with no purpose and no end. So it seemed. Eliza Marrow, 26 years old, of nowhere at all, took up the pen from among his drawings, and it was a good pen, and her hand did not shake because her hand never shook. I should like to amend it, she said. Amend what you like. It is yours. Clause 9 wants a term. She set the nib against the empty line where until such time as ran out into the margin, and she looked up at him, and she found she was smiling, and that it did not frighten her at all. Give me a date, Your Grace. I have a very good hand for dates. He did not move for the space of 3 heartbeats. Then the Duke of Blackmere came round the table, and he did not sweep her up, and he did not go down on one knee, because neither of them had ever once in their lives been theatrical. He took her inky right hand in both of his scarred ones, very carefully, the way a man handles the one instrument he cannot replace. The 4th of October, he said. It is a Saturday. There is a church at Ashby at the head of the cut, and if we are married in it, I can walk you down to the water afterward and show you 40 miles of the most expensive mud in England. That is a poor sort of wedding trip. It is what I have. Then write it, Eliza said, and put the pen into his hand. They were married on the 4th of October in the small stone church at Ashby, with 11 people present, one of whom was Lady Ambrose in purple, weeping furiously and denying it. Eliza wore gray-green silk, taken in at the waist with 11 small stitches, because she saw no reason on earth to waste a good gown. Lord Crane's option on the Ashby cut collapsed in the 2nd week of August, when the corrected survey was laid before the Canal Committee by the company's own clerk, a Miss E. Marrow, who read the 3rd paragraph aloud from memory and then, when challenged, read it again from the copy in her own handwriting, dated November, initialed by Crane's solicitors. He sold his London house before Christmas. Miss Georgiana Crane, released from an engagement she had never been asked about. Married a naval lieutenant 2 years later and was, by every account, extremely happy. The Ashby cut opened the following spring and carried coal at fourpence halfpenny the ton mile, which was a halfpenny more than the Duke of Blackmere had promised, and fourpence less than anyone else in England could manage, and he never entirely forgave himself for the halfpenny. The original contract hung framed in the study at Blackmere, which the Duchess considered vulgar and permitted anyway. Visitors were told it was a curiosity of drafting. Only 2 people in the world ever read it properly, the struck-out date, the one hard black word above it and beneath, in a small, even hand that had never in 22 years wavered on a line. The amendment. Clause 9. Term. The 4th of October and thereafter. There was no other ending written in it. There never needed to be. Did Eliza's quiet, devastating moment at that dinner table leave you cheering? There is nothing better than watching a woman the world has written off open her mouth and turn out to be the only person in the room who read the paperwork. If you love this slow burn between a duchess in fingerless mittens and a duke with mud on his boots, please hit that like button. It genuinely helps the channel. Share this story with anyone who loves a competent heroine and a man who protects her without ever once making her smaller. And do subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our next immersive audio drama. Tell me in the comments, what would you have written on that blank line?